24, 23, 32. Unless you want to go back.
No,
you mentioned, do you want to preface some of the stuff first before you get into the text?
No, that's perfect.
Okay, cool.
Through what, 24?
Let's see. First section here, we had 32 through 43, I think. So however long you think it would be.
Two others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by, watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, saying, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due rewards of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise.
So Tyler and I met earlier this week just to kind of debrief some direction of where we wanted to go tonight. And I think you shared ahead of time, there's a little bit you wanted to kind of go back and unpack with a few other pieces. And it's been a really exciting week for biblical studies, by the way. If you haven't noticed, they actually found some more Dead Sea Scroll fragments, or at least I don't know if they said they didn't find them this week. They just announced it this week, right? Or was it?
Yeah, I'm sure it was recently, though. Yeah.
So, and the first discovery in 60 years?
First fragments found in 60 years. They found something like in the 80s or 90s that was the silver scroll. That was from that same time period. It was like a silver scroll of the Aaronic blessing, like a piece of silver. It's kind of strange, but I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so first fragment from Zechariah, from Nahum. The fragment from Zechariah is like, I can't remember what part of it was, but it was really cool. It was just talking about return to the Lord, seek to do justice and righteousness. God hates lying and deceit and maliciousness. I think it's pretty cool.
All right.
Yeah. And awesome. Yeah, a few other things.
Basket, including you can tell whatever you guys want to do with that's great. So
it's called the Cave of Horror because it was and how they get to it, it's fascinating. We don't know. Same place where the Dead Sea Scrolls are found is near that area. Because basically when the Romans came through to destroy everyone, the Essenes went and hid all their stuff in the caves really well. We couldn't find it for 2,000 years. And so we're still finding stuff, or it's getting looted by people, which is, the whole thing is politically good because it will kind of show the Israel government that it is worth putting money into researching and finding this stuff now before looters get to it, because they're going to take the best stuff. So if we can get to it before they can and have actual money and stuff to get to it, then it's worth putting money towards. But they found in that same cave, they found this 10,000-year-old basket. It was like perfectly preserved, perfectly in shape, a woven basket. It was the pre-pottery era, like before pottery was invented by humans. It was a 10,000-year-old basket. They don't know what was in it because it was empty. So they're going to do studies to find out what it was holding. But a 6,000-year-old mummy, Egyptian practice was there's some mummifying people in that area.
It was a child, right?
Yeah, as a child. And you can tell if someone there was like a blanket around them and someone had tucked it in around the child, had actually done it themselves. Still, you could just because it's the driest place on earth. So stuff gets preserved for 10,000 years and it looks perfect. And then they take it to a museum somewhere and it wilts faster than it did for 10,000 years. And then a bunch of coins from the Bar Kokhba revolts from the 120s or so, when the kind of the final revolts that the Romans crushed the Jews. But that was where you could see the coin, and you can see on the coin the palm branches or the palm trees, because that was their sign of rebellion. I think that's really cool. And then once the Romans defeated them, they made their own coin. It had a wilted palm tree on it and a weeping woman, and it said Judea is captured. So that's their propaganda. I mean, that was their news source, that was our propaganda machine. So I don't know. To me, it was a huge week. That's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
so
it is.
In our lifetime, we get to find this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So do some Google searches on that and see what you can find out in your study time. I did want to point out that I do think it's important, and I have these references listed here in the introduction on page 1. Go back sometime this week and read Isaiah, particularly this really crucial center section in chapters 52 and 53. It's not the only place, really all of Isaiah 40 through 55 is going to be a very rich, set a very rich context, not only for what Jesus believed, but what he was commissioned by his Father to fulfill. And so there's some other references that are listed there too that'll help kind of tie in a much larger picture. And we've mentioned several of those. We've referenced several of those over the past few weeks. But go ahead and share some things that you had mentioned. Maybe you want to do a little backdrop on. And
well, yeah, 40 to 55 is huge too, because 40 to 55 to me is foundational, like you said, for understanding Jesus' ministry. As we've been using it in bits, but as a whole, Isaiah is broken up into books, by the way. So this would be second Isaiah. But in that part, it ends with 39, and 39 is this, you're going to exile. And it ends with this copied narrative from Kings, where he reminds them that they're going to exile. It's a narrative about going to exile. And then 40 to 55 is this big return from exile poem. It's all one big section from 40 to 55. It's this giant section about returning from exile. And it starts with, opens out and kind of, opens up in 40, comfort my people, say to Zion, your iniquity is paid for, your welfare is ended. I'm bringing you home. I'm bringing you back from exile. A voice cries in the wilderness, prepare for us the way of the Lord. And so you get Jesus' ministry opening with John the Baptist, seeing himself as the voice, announcing, comfort my people. I'm the voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, meaning exile's over in the one I'm talking about. So, yeah.
Yeah. So Isaiah is the coolest book, and I've been studying it for the past year. So I want to talk about it for a second. So it's 66 chapters, and there's 66 books in the Bible. And the first 39 chapters are over judgment and remnant back and forth. And there's 39 chapters in the Old Testament. And the New Testament opens up with John the Baptist paving the way. Chapter 40 opens up with the messenger preparing the way. And so in 1 through 39, you're in the 700s BC, and then in chapter 40 on, it's the 500s BC. So it's like this book spans over 3 centuries, and it's just really cool. And so in chapters 1 through 39, you're seeing a lot of this judgment and hope. And then in the next section, you're going to see how is that reconciled, like who brings this hope, and you get all the servant songs.
Yeah.
So it's really cool.
The servant songs are cool, but in their context, you see how cool they are, because it's comfort my people, this big, powerful section, and then immediately just kind of really a sad random twist into this suffering servant who's treated like less than human and isn't even recognizable as human. You're like, what? Where did this turn from?
Yeah.
And then it gets back up to this hopeful, and you're like, what is? It's an emotional roller coaster, because that's the point, is what is happening. Because this return from exile, this vindication of God's people, only happens through the crushing and suffering of the servant. So we pull, I know that we love the suffering servant passages, because we can pull lines from them and say, look, it's about the crucifixion, but in their context, it's powerful that this is how they will return from exile. And then 52, I think we're back in Luke 4, but 52 is how we understand Jesus' ministry, because that is where what gospel is defined. Because he says, how beautiful in the feet of those who preach the gospel, the evangelion, the good news. And then he says that telling Zion, the Lord is coming back, your iniquity is over, telling them that your God reigns, God is becoming king. That's the good news. So we love Isaiah 40 to 55. Well, it's so good.
Something that really struck me as I was going through this study, and it should be kind of just obvious, but I think I have a much deeper appreciation for how thoroughly Jewish Jesus is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, we have a tendency to, even in our art and painting, to make this a very white, Western Jesus, but he would have been of course he helped author it, but he would have been very familiar from the messianic perspective of not only what Isaiah means, but being a living interpretation of it.
Yeah, and that's what the word made flesh means.
Yeah, sure. But even the phrases on the cross point to his messianic understanding, right?
Yeah.
Who he is and what he was there to do.
And that's what we talked about last week when we were here, is that one I love so much, where in his final, talk about if you want to understand what the mind of a first century Jewish rabbi is like, it's in his final moments, he's stitching together Ezekiel 20, Hosea, and two places from Ezekiel, Hosea and Zechariah, stitching them together, expecting you to know the themes that it's talking about, making them one passage and then saying, go figure it out.
Yeah.
You understand what the hills and the green tree and the dry tree and the mountains and the what all this means. And it's not, that is, I mean, that's just how he taught. And it's great.
Awesome. All right. Did you have another section you were mentioning that you wanted to take?
No, I
a look at
don't
something,
think so.
okay.
I couldn't remember what I was going to say.
Okay. Well, it may pop back into your head in just a little bit. So talk a little bit about crucifixion. I know that we've studied it quite a bit in our fellowship, and even in this church, I'm sure we've had lots of lessons on it. But what's going on here? What is this place of the skull? What is the symbolic meaning behind him being crucified between two, if anything? So unpack some of the elements that you guys see here and walk us through that.
Well, the place of the skull is, we don't know. I would say a not great interpretation is this place in Jerusalem that looks like a skull, and you'll hear that a lot. Only problem is that it's soft limestone, and limestone will not last 2,000 years looking the same. It will hardly last a year looking the same. You can scratch it with your fingernail and it'll scratch off. But they'll sell you tickets. You want to go see the place Jesus is crucified because it looks like a skull, and that's kind of how Jerusalem is they'll show you how much you're willing to pay. They'll show you, whatever you want to see, because they're a tourist industry. The place of the skull probably is named that because we know that from tradition and writings, it was a place that was often used for stoning, which will get really interesting, but it's a place used for stoning. So it wasn't shaped like a skull. It was a place where skulls were created. Or like you said in the handout, they didn't let people take down the bodies from the crucifixion to make sure they die a dishonorable death. So people probably decayed and rotted there, and then their bones would be in this spot. But so I think that's why it's called the place of the skull. There's also in Mark, it's a little different because it's playing on the Roman triumph, of which in Rome, the triumph when Caesar is victorious or proclaimed to be new Caesar, it ends at Head Hill in Rome, which is, they were excavated. Well, when they decided to build Rome, the tradition was that they found a skull there. So they called it Head Hill, Capitoline Hill, which means Head Hill. So in Mark, he's playing on that it's the same thing. But so I think it's just a place in Jerusalem that's really a place of death. It was outside the city gates at that time. That's been a source of debate too, because it was outside the city gates. And then they said, no, look, it wasn't. Turns out in 41, 10 years or less after the crucifixion, the Herod Agrippa had expanded the city gates to encompass that. So it was outside the city gates, because that's important. Because Paul says that too. So it was. So okay. And if you go there, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is pretty spot on. It's pretty close. If you want to find out where it is, it's in the basement, the part no one goes to. That's where it was. But so that's kind of nice too, because no one's ever down there. So you can go to where, you're within 15 feet of where Jesus is crucified, and no one goes down there because they think it's the spot they'll show you. But one problem is that's like 3 stories above where it is. Yeah.
Wow.
But crucifixion, you asked about just crucifixion. Yeah,
surely.
It's the one thing I like to teach people is that it is actually pretty offensive to some Jewish people, especially there, more religiously Jewish people, that we wear crosses. We put crosses everywhere because they have had thousands and thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of ancestors crucified by the Romans. And we pick one and then take a cross and I'm not saying we should change it or make light of it. Maybe at least while you're there, a very common practice for the churches and stuff there is an olive tree. That's their cross. That's their symbol, is from Romans 9, 10, 11 is that we've been grafted in to the olive tree, which is Israel. So it's, so that's just to show you how violent and commonly known that was. It wasn't like they just made up crucifixion one day. It was a Rome perfected crucifixion, and it was a zealot's death. It was a dishonorable death. It was, that's where we get excruciating, the word excruciating from. The goal was to keep you alive as long as possible and humiliate you as much as possible. Yeah. So and a good crucifixion squad could keep you alive for 3 days. So this one was unbelievably quick, but they had to hurry and get him in the ground. Sure. So yeah. Sure.
You brought up something the other day when we were preparing that I don't know that I was aware of, and some of you in the room may know this already, but I didn't realize that, like during Passover season, or during Passover occasionally, that they would actually crucify hundreds, if not as many as like 1,000
Yeah.
Jews, maybe at one time.
Yeah. And then Josephus says that there were Passovers would be 500 or more people crucified. So the Roman practice was to crucify you as you come into town. So you're walking on the main road to town. And so you come into Jerusalem singing the songs in the set as we're doing on Sunday. And as you near to Jerusalem, there is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people lining the roads who are being crucified. Because that they want you to see as you're walking into Jerusalem who really runs this area, and so that you know what Roman justice looks like. So you can know when you walk, you better not do anything these people did, or you'll suffer the same fate. So I mean that, and there was years where they would make a public showing of more, where Pilate sometimes, but they would in that region have thousands of people crucified in Jerusalem. They'd hold prisoners, I mean, like Barabbas and his followers, they'd hold them until Passover, so that when all the, hundreds of thousands of Jews came into town, they could see thousands of people crucified. So it could be that there are many people crucified beside Jesus, and these are just the three that it focuses on, which is symbolic of Jesus, the one falsely being crucified, as a zealot then who repents, and the zealot who refuses to repent and insists on his own kingdom. That would be a good image for all of what's going on. It could be just them three, but we know from history there were Passovers where there would be thousands crucified. And one in the handout, they ran out of crosses. And we talked, I don't think I said that last time. When you carry the cross beam. You don't carry the full thing. It's hundreds of pounds. It's not possible. So they leave the vertical post in the ground, and you carry the cross beam yourself. They tie your hands to it. I don't know if I said that, but I did. Yeah. So they literally ran out of wood to crucify people on 1 year. So they nail you to doorposts or olive trees or anything they could to show you what Roman justice is like. They want to make sure you get the message. Yeah, it's Passover is not just Passover, but specifically Passover is a brutal, scary time to be in Jerusalem in this day because you don't know. We talked about a long time ago, the triumphal entry, how there was a guy not long before Jesus' time, definitely in his life, that tried to lead a rebellion on the Mount of Olives. And he got caught, and his followers didn't back him up when he said, go attack the city and it'll fall like the walls of Jericho. He said, go get him, and no one did because they were scared. He got his head cut off and put in a cage, and apparently was still hanging there in Jesus' day above the city gate, his head in a cage. Because when you walk in for your Passover, they want you to make sure you celebrate your little Passover, but we're in charge. Crucifixion was well known.
Wow. Any thoughts, questions, observations? Not a fun topic to talk about, particularly when we think about how our Lord, and Savior was treated and what he had to endure for us. But would love to hear any thoughts or questions anyone has before we move on. So an interesting question for me here is the plural pronouns, they and them. And
oh yeah.
So is he talking particularly about the Romans? Is he talking about?
Well, we talked about that Monday. That was hard.
Yeah.
And I think David Flusser offered a good explanation because because I forgot which they is really confusing. And the people stood by watching, but the ruler scoffed at him, saying, he saved our themselves. And then the soldiers, and then there's like a few theys that are like, who is he talking about? The they. But if Flusser's right, which I think is a good explanation, it would be a threefold of they. It would be the Jewish leaders mock him, and then the guy on the cross, the zealot, mocks him, and then the who else would it be? Then the Roman soldier mocks him, and then it is reversed because the other zealot accepts him, and whatever we understand that, and then Joseph of Arimathea, one of the council members, the Jewish leaders, accepts him, and then the Roman soldier says, surely this man was innocent. So you get the threefold mocking, and then right when he dies, everyone goes, oh, actually he was innocent. It's like immediately the veil is lifted, and they're like, what did we just do? So it seems to be like which is very Luke to do, but a threefold matching of the three mockings and the three. But that's only if that they is applying to who I think it is, which that would be a good explanation, and that would be a Luke thing to do. That's hard thing with Koine Greek though, is it's always like they, he, I. So you never know. Right. They use he a lot when there's like multiple people in a sentence. So I think that would be what's going on, is a threefold mocking, the threefold kind of belief after the crucifixion.
Okay.
We
talked a little bit about the Greek word that is used to, and I think Matthew and Mark maybe is different than Luke, to talk about the criminals. So you may want to give a little insight there.
Yeah, I haven't looked at Luke, but maybe it is different. But I know that to understand who the target is, lastai is the word for thief or robber, but it's not. It's a violent criminal. It's not just someone who robbed something, like Mel Gibson puts the two people beside him in the Passion of the Christ with cups that they stole. But it's a brigand or a insurrectionist or a rebel. It's a zealot. And to me, it's a zealot. That's what he's trying to say. I just don't know if I don't know if they thought, the gospel writers knew, their audience probably didn't know who zealots were, so they keep trying to explain, these are lastai. Think of whatever in your context, rebellious insurrectionists. They probably didn't know who Jewish zealots were, because in a global scale in Rome, they weren't that big. But that is where Jesus in the temple is quoting to the leadership, my house should be a house of prayer for all nations, but you made it a den of lastai. You made it a den of insurrectionists, not just like robbers. Point is, these insurrectionists, these zealots came up under your watch and your care. This is your fault. For all this rebellion that's going to happen, for the destruction in 70 that's going to happen because the lastai refused to back down. This is your fault for letting it happen. So I think that's the same thing going on here, is that he's, and then Barabbas is a lastai. He's an insurrectionist and a murderer. So he's a zealot. So yeah, they're not thieves beside him. The point is, Jesus is dying to death, that this is what they think he is. They're crucifying him beside two zealots. One of which is like, we deserve this. He's like, hey man, we got this coming to us. We knew Rome's law. We knew we'd get crucified. Very clear-headed on his final moments, but
right.
Yeah. So I think it's a lot stronger than just robber.
Okay. Yeah, I just noticed in the notes that Luke uses kakurgoi. It means malefactors or evildoers. Of course, those two could be, but generally Luke's not getting quite as specific.
Yeah, and that's good.
Yeah,
I would imagine these were followers of Barabbas, and what's ironic is Barabbas got off free. That's such a weird twist to me, that Barabbas' followers end up dying and he doesn't. Meanwhile, Jesus ends up dying and his followers don't. So another kind of contrast with Luke. But yeah, this is probably, they would generally capture, which shows you why Peter was so scared and they all ran, was because they usually capture the leader, then capture all their followers and crucify all of them. So they capture Barabbas, capture his followers, let Barabbas go free, but still crucify his followers. And so Luke and Peter's terrified to be found, and their family's standing far off because they're scared to be found out, even as his family. Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating that Luke tends to keep people at more of a distance.
Yeah.
But we know that Jesus has a conversation with his mother at some point in the dialogue. And so what's Luke up to? What's he trying?
Well, there is a psalm. I think it may be 30 something, 39 maybe, talking about far off. I think he's trying to hint at. Yeah. And I don't know if
we had that listed.
Did we?
And they had it somewhere is the idea of my everyone is far from me.
Yeah. It's like those, even my closest kin are far off and away from me.
Yes.
And it seems to be hinting there at that kind of really sad psalm about that despised and rejected, even my closest family are
38:11. Psalm 38:11.
Yeah. So that could be what he's hinting at, I would imagine. But it's again that suffering servant theme of dying alone and despised and completely alone, so much so that he even says, why have you forsaken me? Even he feels even alone from God. He dies completely alone. So it seems to be really emphasizing the aloneness of Jesus right now. Yeah. Sad.
Okay. Questions, thoughts?
I could talk a little bit more about the skull, the place.
Yeah, surely. Whatever you
physical want. Place he's crucified. This is, well, we know where he's crucified, almost square inch. We're pretty certain. If you ever go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, go to the back, go all the way down the basement, 80 stairs. There's this dark, it looks like a cave, but that was surface level at one point. And it's almost shaped like a cereal bowl. And that cereal bowl was a hewn out quarry. It was a quarry that was dug out, and then they got down further and the rock was all cracked and it was bad. So they abandoned it. I mean, maybe by like Hezekiah's time, they abandoned it. It was old, really old quarry, which at one point that was way outside the city, but by this time it was right outside. It was right outside the city. What would you say?
I just know the punchline.
Yeah, and it's interpretive, but and so that was why it was a place of the skull. So it was a condemned place. I mean, you can't do it, nothing grows there, and you're not going to cut any more stone there, the stone cutters, because it's condemned rock. I mean, it's all cracked. And so I think the image and I'm not alone in this, but the image then would be the rejected stone is then crucified and rejected in an abandoned rock quarry of rejected stone, to push the image even further to his Jewish audience, that they go west of Jerusalem to the abandoned rock quarry of rejected stone, after Jesus all week has been quoting, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. I mean, you can go today, when you go down there, you can see, if you have a light, there's some lights down there, but you can see the chisel marks on the wall still from the quarry from 3,000 years ago, well, less than that, but 2,500 years ago. Maybe as early as Hezekiah's time, which is cool to me too, because Jesus was a stone cutter. I mean, that was his job, a tecton. He's a stone cutter from Nazareth. You can go to the quarry in Nazareth where Jesus probably worked with Joseph. But yeah, I think that's the image there. The rejected stone is crucified and rejected in a big bowl of rejected stones. And that's why he's taken to a hill, because they dug that out so much it formed a hill, but he was crucified at the base of the hill, not on top of a hill. Remember, the Romans want it to be on the main road, and they also want you to see him eye to eye as you come in. He's only a few feet off the ground. He's not 20 feet in across on a hill far away. It's far away from here, but not far away from them. Because they want you to be up close and personal to that. And the reason that was a place of stoning was because to stone someone, we talked about this a long time ago, but to stone someone, you have to push them off a cliff a certain height, which we can go to the cliff in Nazareth where Jesus was probably about to be stoned at, until they realized if we stone him, we're going to be guilty of murder. And so this was why they stoned people there. It was condemned. You can die here. It won't poison the land or make that land unclean. So they push people off. Yeah. So it's cool to me that is the image I think he's pushing for a lot, but that's, we don't know for sure.
Yeah. Well, can you imagine? I mean, we talk about having it bad today and how awful things are, but I mean, you're bringing your children into Jerusalem for Passover, and you got to walk through. I mean, I can't even get my head around that. How horrible it must have been.
Yeah.
Just that the Romans, I mean, their intention was so obvious. I mean, it was just total intimidation.
That's why Pilate was so nervous, because he was basically, we know from Roman historical documents, he is on his last straw. He's on his last straw with Caesar. Caesar's like, if you do not get Judea submitted, if you do not get them in line, I'll kill you. Like, you'll be killed or exiled, which he ended up running some trouble not long after Jesus. I think he quit his job basically, but in whatever degree you could do that. But that's why you can see him torn between, he has to make sure this region is under control, and crucifying an innocent person in his mind would make the region go out of control. And then if people's voices prevailed, turns out the region will be out of control if he doesn't crucify him. So he crucified a man he knows is innocent. And you get this inner dialogue almost of Pilate, where he has to crucify someone he knows is innocent because he's chosen to serve Caesar. They call it restless Judea. They could not get Judea under control.
Wow. So there's this fascinating prayer of Jesus in verse 34, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So we've asked this question previously, but who's the them? And typically forgiveness usually requires repentance, but we also see in Jesus's greater ministry that some of the captives that he's come to set free may not even have conscious awareness of what they need to be freed from. Yeah. So if you guys are willing, speak to that a little bit. Somebody else may have some questions or observations.
I mean, I don't know much about it, but I would imagine if it's more practical, it's forgive these people, they don't know what they're doing. And then immediately after that, you get the zealot who realizes what he's doing, what he's done. You get the Roman who just realizes what he's done. This guy was innocent. And then you get the rich man who was on the Sanhedrin who didn't consent to his death, realize what the Sanhedrin had done. So it seems to be they all then, after his crucifixion, then that is kind of the veil being torn, is then they realize what they've done. Yeah. So it could be kind of more as practical as that. They don't understand what they're doing. In the sense, of course, they didn't understand what they're doing. And if it's the they, of course, maybe the they is blurry on purpose, like Luke likes to do. But, in Paul, the evil powers crucifying the Son of God had no idea what they were doing, because if they did, they wouldn't have done it, from 1 Corinthians. So Jesus had to keep his death and resurrection a secret from them, or hidden from them, and to make sure that they could not understand it until he opened their eyes after. And then, because if they understood it then, and if the powers of darkness, Paul will say, understood it, they wouldn't have gone through with it. So I don't know who the
Yeah.
they is. Could be everyone.
That's interesting. Stephen offers a similar prayer, right, in Acts 7. And,
Yeah.
so we see, at least in this context, we certainly see at the heart of Jesus's ministry. I mean, I think about so many individual conversations that he had with so many different people, and that here, as he's close to his last breath, he's still preaching and teaching and modeling forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. If we would treat, people that we just don't even have an affinity for, let alone our enemies, in that way, what a very different world we might see.
I could. This is the culmination of his ministry. It's the people crucifying him. Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That is the living out his ministry. That is exactly living out what he taught.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we took that more seriously, the world would look different.
Yeah.
Be a lot more peaceful.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm asking way too many questions. What other questions do you all have as we think about this text here? Or you guys may just have some observations that you want to make. I can ask questions all night long if we want, but you may have some things you want to point out.
I do like something interesting is when they take his garments off, because they crucified naked, the Romans did. They rip his garments off, and then he at that point would have lost his tassels that they wore, which are to them symbolize God's protection. So that's not in there, but I think if you're reading that as a Jewish audience, you would have seen that his tassels are then ripped off, and which symbolizes God's protection. Remember David cutting off Saul's tassel, saying God's not protecting you. So I think that could be there, but I don't know.
And I'm assuming this was pretty common to divide the clothes and gamble.
Yeah, it was paired with that game of the who's hitting you game. They would pair that with that, and they would do it to prisoners. The Roman soldiers would do it with prisoners, cast lots, and they would basically decide, keep hitting him until he dies, and then we'll cast lots for who gets his wife, who gets his house, who gets his land, who gets his clothes, who gets everything. So they're doing that with Jesus. They do the prophesy who's hitting you, and then they're casting lots for everything he has. They're playing the game. That Caesar even saw that later as so brutal that he outlawed it after this. Not after this, but later than this, he outlawed it, because even Caesar saw that as too brutal of a game to play with even prisoners.
Wow. So they're mocking him here, and I think Luke uses the phrase, and the rulers even sneered at him. And so there's some metaphor here, I think, related to satanic activity.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys want to speak to that just a little bit, and the mocking that's going on by the rulers, by the soldiers. And then we see this offering of wine vinegar. You may want to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to look at this question in the chat box here while you guys talk about that.
The rulers thing is still that same language of Satan working in and through these earthly rulers. The wine and vinegar, later the wine, what they would do, and I don't think this may be what Matthew is hinting at, but or Mark's trying to do something else though. But they would often, with sacrifices in the temple, when they give the sacrifice, they would also throw in wine with it. I don't know if that's what he's trying to hint at, but that is another practice they would do in the temple. As it's called libation, and that was kind of a cultural practice. They would pour out wine on the burnt offering while they put on the fat and the skin and whatever parts of the animal they offer to God. They'd pour out wine with it. So I kind of see that as one of the images of Jesus being offered up as the sacrifice, but also they're mockingly mixing wine with the sacrifice like they would do in the temple. But the Romans give it to them, so I doubt that's what they're saying. But there was a practice where, they would mix it with vinegar or egg or something gross as a mocking way. And then there were some Jews who were, if they were able to get that close, would give them wine just to ease pain while they died. But that Romans didn't let them get that close that often. But this one seems to be a mocking one. It's not the easing pain one. Yeah. But it seems to be from Psalm 22 as well, where he's talking about how thirsty he is, and his tongue sticks to his jaws, and so he's thirsty, and they're mockingly giving him wine. Yeah. What
about the phrases related to the chosen one, or if you're the king of the Jews, save yourself? What's going on there? So that he saved others, let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one. There's like so much in that. But remember back to Luke 4 in the synagogue in Nazareth, when I think one of my favorite stories in all of Luke, the foundation for Jesus' ministry, he starts by telling them, teaching from Isaiah 61, and teaches them that the year of Jubilee is here, return from exile is happening in me, the scriptures fulfilled in me, God's anointed, all that.
And then they celebrate, they get super excited saying, isn't this Joseph's son? I mean, we knew, the Messiah would come from Nazareth. Then he kind of rained on their parade, talking about how God, or Elijah and Elisha didn't go to Israel because at that time Israel was unfaithful. So he went to the Gentiles. And he cut them off and he says, but you will, basically, when you get around to asking me a question and stop celebrating, you'll ask me, physician, heal yourself. And that's at the very beginning of Luke. He says, you're going to ask me to heal myself if I'm a physician. If I'm here to save us, save yourself. But then he goes into the talk about Elijah and Elisha. So I see this as that, them saying, if you're the Messiah, heal yourself. But and he's been trying to teach the whole time, that's not how the Messiah comes. That's not how the suffering servant comes. Suffering servant doesn't come by healing himself and then others. Suffering servant comes by giving himself and then others are healed because of that. So they're doing exactly what he said in Luke 4. Save yourself, heal yourself if you're a physician. But that's not, if he were to heal himself, no one would be healed. And that's what they don't understand, is that that's what the two angels, when he resurrects, says, didn't he explain to you in Galilee that the Messiah has to first suffer, the Son of Man has to first suffer and then be resurrected and be vindicated? So he's been trying to teach them all along that he has to suffer if they want to be healed. I think that's what's going on with that. His chosen one is interesting because that's from Isaiah, the suffering servant song, constantly, my chosen one. And God will say in Isaiah, Israel or Jacob, same thing, my chosen one, because Jesus himself is the embodiment of Israel and the covenant God and the covenant Israel. He's the embodiment of both. Paul will run with that kind of, but he's the chosen one is God's covenant partner and God's chosen servant. All the servant songs, my chosen one, my chosen one. So I think that's that. They're mocking him. They know the suffering. And that's the irony of this, is while the servant is suffering, they're mocking him, quoting the suffering servant songs. I thought you were God's chosen one. And that Enoch knew that, because in the book of Enoch, he calls the Messiah figure chosen one also. He knows those passages apparently. So there is more mocking, saying that the suffering servant must save himself if he's really God's chosen one. But that is the opposite of what the suffering servant psalms say. They're not to save yourself. Yeah.
You made an interesting observation when we were together on Monday about, and that might intrigue some of our Narnia fans with the death of Aslan.
I talked about that last week.
Oh, you did already? Yeah. Okay, great.
From
Great,
Psalm
okay.
22.
So, if you didn't hear that, go back and watch the lesson from last week. Yeah. So that's really intriguing to me. Really intriguing. Any thoughts, observations? We do have one question here, and then I'll see if anybody else has something to share. I believe in the movie Spartacus, showed him and others on crosses on the road leaving the city at the end of the movie. Now that makes sense to me. Yeah. So it's been a long time since I've seen Spartacus, but yes, that may I'll have to go back and watch that scene. Questions, observations, thoughts?
The chosen one I also forgot is, chosen one is what the Father at the Transfiguration ripped open the sky and says, this is my son, listen to him, my chosen one. And then at his baptism, same thing, my chosen one. So now they're mocking what God had said to his son at baptism and Transfiguration. It's scary. But yeah, that they're mocking God's own words to his own son. I forgot about that.
And it is really intriguing that everything is coming in triplets in this section. I'm just fascinated by that.
Yeah, on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses, something is true.
Yeah.
There's 2 people at the resurrection.
Exactly.
Both Marys at the resurrection, both angels at the resurrection.
Right.
Both people on the road to Emmaus. It's always 2 or 3 witnesses have to be basis for something being true. There's always 2 or 3 of something. Either or, it could be against you, 2 or 3 witnesses against you to make sure it wasn't just one random guy saying, let him save himself. It was 2 or 3 people telling him the same thing. Yeah. I think that's what is going on there.
Okay. We have this notice above his head, King of the Jews, which is, again, is just it's kind of more of the same, right? As far as the mocking, just a different way to insult. And we see the one criminal who then comes and kind of starts to say, hey. So his understanding is going to be of a political Messiah. Yeah. You got the power to do this. So if you really are the guy, then exercise the power. And so one gets it and one doesn't. And then we ultimately have this use of the word paradise. And so that's intriguing. Like to hear your thoughts on that. And
this will be the first.
Anything else you want to share?
This is probably the first reference in all the Bible, well, all of the New Testament, of paradise. Paradise is a Second Temple Jewish belief. It is hearkening to them. Well, this could open up a giant can of worms. I'm trying to be careful. To them, the ideas of heaven and hell were developed really during that Maccabean time when they were suffering so greatly that they, I think God helped them develop, but understand an idea of eternal judgment and eternal vindication. Because if God won't act in our lifetimes, this surely can't be the end. He will judge the wicked and vindicate the righteous. So they called it paradise. That it's the Garden of Eden in the sky, essentially, the paradise of God. And I want to be careful of that because that is not the end of the story, because it's not, that is not the end of, as we'll see when Jesus resurrects. Barabbas goes to be in paradise, but Jesus doesn't. He comes back and resurrects on earth, much like when we will resurrect on earth. That is, so I don't want, paradise is not the end of it. He's just saying today you'll be with me in paradise. But he quickly leaves the zealot from paradise and resurrects back. So it's, to them, that was, of course, what we would probably call heaven, but I don't even like that phrase because heaven isn't all we think it is. I'm trying to be careful, but you might help me.
We'll do a study on heaven sometime.
Yeah, because we got to understand the resurrection of the dead, bodily resurrection of believers. That was so important to biblical theology that most people don't know about. When we read, a lot of times when people read about resurrection of the dead, we're thinking go to heaven when you die, but that's not. We're thinking where grandpa and grandma are right now. And that's not what, that is, they are with the Lord, but that is not the final state, because even the souls under the altar in Revelation are saying, how long until this is over? How long? Because we will be resurrected on the earth. And that preceded Jesus by hundreds of years. And all Paul's teaching on resurrection, he didn't make a bit of that up. I mean, around Jesus he did, but he had to reorient his philosophy, his theology of resurrection around Jesus and his resurrection. But his stuff you'd think was straight out of Pharisaic literature. I mean, of course, Sadducees didn't believe in resurrection of the dead, so they didn't believe in that stuff. But Pharisees did, and that's why they would get ahead of ourselves. So that's why they would collect the bones from people's burial. They collect the bones once the flesh decayed, because your sinful nature is in your flesh. Probably heard Paul say that, in the flesh, in this corrupted flesh. And so the idea is collect the bones, and we'll be resurrected, given new flesh when we resurrect. So the bones are bad, but when the flesh is decaying, it's unclean, stay away. So that is huge. And so all that to say, paradise is, we will be with the Lord, but of course that's not the final state. I don't want people to think we're waiting for this paradise in the sky, disembodied state, Gnosticism, all that. But that will be probably for the resurrection.
Well, you shared with me Monday that even that the way that that they handle the remains, with tremendous, a lot of respect and care. Yeah. And so maybe just viewing death quite differently than how we view death. And some others may have some thoughts on that, or some studies that you've done that could be helpful here. I don't want to fly through this, but would love to get your thoughts if you have a question or observation. Not just about that, but anything we've looked at so far. I do think paradise is, and I put this in the notes, I do think there is, in some ways, it's reminiscent of garden. And Jesus, part of what Jesus came to do was to restore that which was a result of the fall. And so there could be some bit of an illusion there. I don't think it's, apples and apples, but.
It's definitely, they definitely saw the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, as part of the.
But I'm jumping a bit to. Because you're right there. I love it. Because he's buried in a garden tomb, and then he's resurrected in the garden. And Mary and Martha and John mistake him for the gardener. Oh yeah. Because if this is the new creation, he must be the new Adam, and Adam was the gardener. This must be a new creation. This is that's how John says it. But it's it's very Edenic. It's a lot of Eden principles. Yeah. Of course, in Revelation, it's the same thing. But awesome. Yeah, definitely harkening back to Eden. I didn't emphasize it enough.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Very, very, very good. Very good. Well, we have in this next section that it's about the 6th hour, and this is intriguing that darkness comes over the land of the 9th hour. So we're at about noontime, and then there's about 3 hours of darkness. The text says the sun stopped shining. Some folks have said that means there was an eclipse, and historically, folks will tell you that would have not been true at that time. And so what is the darkness? What's that about, you think?
Well, the 6th hour, there's the 3rd hour and the 9th hour. Those are the morning and evening sacrifices. The 6 hours when the Passover sacrifice is given. Now, Jesus didn't die at that. Remember, there's all this imagery working. He didn't die on Yom Kippur, he didn't die on Day of Atonement. He died on Passover, but not for the Passover sacrifice. He wants multiple images working. The 9th hour is when you sacrifice the national sacrifice for the sins of the whole nation. So it's not the 9th hour. And well, the way Leviticus explains is the Passover sacrifice is between the evenings. So between morning, evening, and evening, which would be the 6 hour, which is always changing and hard to calculate with the sunset and stuff like that. So as a 6 hour, then there's darkness over the whole land, which is one, the plagues in Egypt, the darkness coming over him and coming over Israel now, but also to me, the sun's light failing, that is decreation. It's decreation happening because what you read the next verses and it's new creation, the second Adam, we'll get into that, but it's new creation starting, but first decreation happens. The sun's light fails. And then we go back to pre-Genesis 1:1, where the very first thing God does is speak light into existence. And so then decreation happens by everyone resting on that Saturday when Jesus is in the tomb and he's resting. And it's the finishing of this creation and the starting and bringing into the present of the new creation. So then everyone, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all want to emphasize on the first day of the week, on the first day of the week, on the first day of the week, it's the new creation. It's on the first day of the week, then the light comes back, then all this stuff happens. New creation is happening. So it's all that. I think it's really hinting at that whether the sun really went out, I don't know. Not the point. He's telling a story to try to make you understand what is happening. Maybe it just got cloudy. That may have been what they. Yeah.
It is interesting though in the creation account, if my memory serves me correctly, that the sun didn't come until later.
The sun didn't come until
light and darkness
after there was light.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is Revelation picks up on where in Revelation there's no sun because Jesus is our light, which I think John is playing off this, where when the Son of God dies, the light goes out, and then the temple veil is torn in two. That's.
Okay, you got 5 minutes to
I'll give you
the temple veil.
There's
being torn in
two. First of all, there's two temple veils. I'm not sure which one they're talking about, and everyone will tell you the second one, and that's fine. And I think the point is all of it. It's supposed to be both veils. Hebrews will really emphasize because there's a veil going into the temple, and notice it says the veil of the temple. It doesn't say which one. And to me, the veil of the temple is to get into the temple, not the temple grounds or the temple mount, but the actual temple that only the priests go into. And then past that's the second veil to the Holy of Holies, where the high priest goes into once a year. So that we can leave that for next week. Of that veil being torn has kind of 3 or 4 images that it could be, that it is, that Hebrews picks up on, that I think Acts 2 picks up on, that Paul picks up on, and Peter. But if it's the other veil, and this is kind of interpretive, but if it's the outer veil, what a lot of people don't know is on that outer veil, what is sewn into it is the zodiac signs. I mean, all of the zodiac signs, the 12 zodiac signs, which actually in Leviticus and Exodus kind of laid in numbers, are like laid upon Israel, that each of Israel has a zodiac sign. So imagine a whole lot of imagery working there, obviously. Yeah, I know. But don't worry about that. I've never heard that. Each of Israel's flag that they're given for their tribe is one of the zodiac signs. They were super into star reading and zodiac signs, not for like horoscope stuff, but for, I mean, that was just their culture. I mean, God, first thing he wanted Abraham to realize is he don't worship the stars, right? Yeah. But on that outer veil was the signs of the zodiac, because the point was this temple is a micro Eden. This is mini where heaven meets earth. And so the entrance to the place where God is going through the zodiac signs, the sky. To them, well, they didn't know what the universe was, but the sky being ripped open. So to me, if the temple veil is torn, it's that zodiac signs, what we would call the universe, the sky, the cosmos being ripped open, which I think is what better way to explain what happens to the Trinity when the Son of God dies, other than why have you forsaken me, but you haven't really, and then the universe being ripped open, that image. If it's the outer veil, we don't know. I think they don't tell us on purpose, but Josephus made a big deal about that outer veil being the zodiac signs. And I think that is a great way to show that when the Son of God dies, heaven and earth are ripped open out of grief, but also out of new creation. It's the sun's light fails, the Son of God dies, the cosmos is ripped open so that new creation can begin.
Yeah, wow. That's incredibly powerful. We get this last statement here of Jesus, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And I think we have a tendency sometimes to see this as an ending, but as you and I've noted on Monday, it's really a beginning. It's the,
Absolutely.
now the work of Christ.
Yeah.
New
Creation's begun.
Begins. Yeah. New creation has begun.
That's actually I don't know how old it is, but that is still Orthodox Jews today sometimes will say that prayer before going to bed. It's a long prayer, but the end of the prayer is, into your hands I commit my spirit, because you're going to sleep. And the word for commit in Hebrew, as I've been told, is more of you give it to someone expecting it back. It's like how you give your money to the bank. I commit to the bank to get the money back, not so they can have it. So I think that's Jesus' prediction of his resurrection, is I commit my hands to your spirit, but so I can come back. Don't know. I mean, I think it's definitely from the Psalms, but that was how they still today interpret that phrase of, as you go to sleep, you commit your spirit to God to trust you and protect you in your most vulnerable state, as close to death as you'll ever be every day. And then in the morning, he watched over you, he protected you, he gives you in a sense, gives you your breath, your spirit back. So I think every word of the crucifixion is so powerful.
Well, 7 phrases. We need to maybe look at all of those from the different gospels and pull all of them together. So,
the 7 phrases is actually, there's 7. Yeah. Throughout all of them, there's 7. And I've seen how they can be mapped onto Psalm 22 and how they all seem to, mother, your son, your mother, your son, that can be mapped onto one. I thirst. That's definitely mapped onto Psalm 22. Of course, the one straight out of Psalm 22 is mapped onto that. So that would give hint to the Jewish idea of a death passage that you wait your whole life to be reciting as you die. We may do it with a hymn, or we may do it with a passage. I know some people have done that, but this passage you are planning to recite as you die. And that seems to be him almost gasping out words of Psalm 22. And we're catching glimpses of, those hints of that. I don't know though, but that's the 7 phrase. And then the 7 times God speaks is creation. God speaks 7 times, speaks 7 things into existence. And he'll do the same thing with Moses at Sinai. He speaks, because where heaven meets earth again at Sinai, he speaks 7 times. And it's him, I think, on the cross starting new creation, speaking 7 times.
So if you think all of this is just lucky numbers lining up, that's a pretty big leap.
All that to say, don't ever take numbers literally. They're usually, you'll find rarely will you find a number they literally meant that number.
Right. Fascinating. Okay, well, our time is past tonight, guys. Thank you so much. We'll take up from here next week, and we've got 2 more Wednesday nights, and we're going to wrap up our Luke study, and so next week and the following week. And so thank you all very much for being here. I'd like to pray us out tonight. God, thanks for the blessing of the day. Thank you, Lord, for this time to be in your word, even as we have studied tonight the death of our Lord and Savior. May we know that it was always about life and renewal and reconciliation. And so, Father, give us faith, Lord, to live into that with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hour flew by.
Yeah.